Well, let's get started. My name is Ruth Nicholson. I guess I'm your host. I work part-time for Team Genius, training clubs to use the platform that is an assessment platform for tryouts and evaluations of players and coaches and referees. In my other half of my world, I actually have a program called Go, where I help organizations with boards of directors and operations and administrative sorts of things, so the back end runs well. My partner in crime is Gabe Skelly. He's our customer success manager at Team Genius. He's also a tech whiz. And for those of you who are living in the world of online meetings, one of the really cool things when you do that is to have somebody worry about content and somebody else worry about the tech and all the back end stuff. So I'm really glad he's here to help us. So what we do every week as people sign up for this conversation is they let us know what's on your mind, what topics are on your mind. And we sort of had 3 chunks of questions that came in. Today, we're going to talk about summer activities. What are those beginning to look like for you as things start to open up and we've got optimism and confusion and maybe a little worry and concern. We'll talk about return to play, new things that have happened in the last week. And then at 1:30, I'm hoping that Catherine Knorr will be able to join us again. She was with us last week when we were talking about waivers and liability. She's actually an attorney in the state of Hawaii and does a lot of sports law things, waivers, and those sorts of things. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. We'll incorporate them as we go along, because the point here is to talk about what's on your mind and help you find some answers as we try to navigate what's going on these days. So let's start off. So Gabe has this wild goal every week of talking to at least 50 different youth clubs every week. So Gabe, what did you hear this last week that was new and different and hopeful?
Yeah, so a lot of interesting things this week. One of the big things that I heard was, a lot of starting to resume to play, or at least resume to practice, or people that can, especially if you're using a private training facility that's not, regulated as maybe a traditional, city or town governed one or a school governed one. Businesses that do training are starting to resume back to what they're doing. A lot of positivity. I've had this week, a lot of people are very positive on outlooks for the season, changing seasons, maybe starting a little bit late or changing around the way the seasons are going to work, but very positive on getting back to their seasons. Some kind of new tech that I haven't heard of in different ways being used. One of the things I alluded to last week is I talked to one club where they're going to use drones where they can to actually make sure that the players are far enough away from each other on the fields. And I've heard that people are planning on doing that where they can. So the idea, using drones to take aerial footage to make sure people are far enough away from each other. The other one is for indoor facilities, and I hadn't studied this at all, but the idea of using biofogging. I know of at least one place where it's a biological fogger. It's a machine that's made that essentially will kill bacteria and viruses in a very quick amount of time. And you basically set it and it goes and it produces a either dry or wet mist fog that will kill biological contaminants. That and then UV cleaning options. So there's a lot of companies out there that are really going gangbusters on getting the ability out there to clean indoor facilities fast. And that's kind of a cool thing that I started looking into and just hearing a little bit from this week. So those are big things. On the other side, seeing a lot of positivity in clubs that are doing, training, doing at-home stuff with kids, a lot of fun things. I've seen a lot of clubs that are on TikTok now, which I haven't seen before, but they're engaging with their players on TikTok, which is fun and interesting, and just new places to engage and do those things. Also seeing a little bit more on the what it takes to keep kids. As adults, you talk about burnout, but kids too. They're at home and they're maybe locked in, not be able to do too much stuff outside, but a little bit more focus on mindfulness and just doing things like exercising as much as they can, but doing something like meditation or just focusing on the good things and working on ways to do that, writing down 3 positives. I've heard of clubs pushing something I do every night before I go to bed. I write down 3 positives at work and 3 positives in my out of work life in a journal. And I've heard a lot of clubs starting to talk about having their kids write out 3 positive things that they did either at practice or that they enjoyed about interacting with their team and friends if they're doing it virtually. So working on that kind of mindfulness factor a little bit more than I think I've ever heard before in the youth sports realm. So a lot of interesting things coming up this week.
All right. Well, we had a couple of questions about summer activities. I took a walk for lunch, and we've got new flowers blooming in the green belts behind my house, and I'm like, June is showing up early here. I'm in Washington State, the western side of the U.S. But we had some questions about summer camps and recommendations for things you can do in summer camps, as well as do coaches or athletes need to wear face coverings during camps and clinics? So the question to you, this is like the part where you get to talk, right? The question to you is, how are you looking at summer activities as we start to get in summer camps, summer clinics? What's going on where you are with your sport in the summer? Anyone? We don't know what's going on with the summer.
Oh, for ice hockey on the East Coast of New Jersey, nothing.
Nothing.
Everything's shut down.
Everything is still shut down in the world of hockey.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pick on Scott, and I told him I was going to pick on him. Scott's also one of our geniuses, but he's also a hockey coach, and his kids play baseball in California. So Scott, what happened with your kids and your teams this week?
Yeah, very interesting. So taking off my Team Genius hat and throwing my my youth hockey coach and San Jose Junior Sharks hat. But I coach a mite team and a squirt team. So I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old boys. And we had a big town hall earlier this week. And as John had mentioned, I mean, the Sharks ice right now is just completely down. So there isn't really anything happening from that standpoint. But the biggest message coming out, I think, was, and as hard as it is for us hockey guys to do, is patience. Because we all want to get a jump start on tryouts and go through some camps and do some stuff. So patience was like the biggest messaging coming out of there. I know CAHA, the California Amateur Hockey Association, and then USA Hockey, there's some meetings, I think, in June that we're hearing about. I know in Colorado they're doing a little bit, but there's some June meetings where we should have some more clarification around what sort of allowances there could be for camps, clinics, and lead-ups to the fall 2020-2021 season. So the hope is still to have a remnants of a season. I mean, I think the advantage a little bit with hockey is that there is a 3 to 4 month stretch here of being able to kind of, take a step back and look through protocols and best practices and see how, the communities around them and as a nation sort of respond to getting back to youth sport. So there's part of that for sure. And, but the other message was, hockey is going to look much, much different when we all see each other again at the rink in a few months, right? So certainly in our area here in California, there's discussions around, still creating teams and having a season per se, but it may or may not be against other associations or other clubs. There could be some restrictions on locker rooms and dressing before you get to the rink. And, potentially – it could be a situation where we're having limited coaches and players, on the ice at a time, and it's a skills drills, developmental, simulated game type development season until we can further wrap our arms around this. So, and depending on where you are and where you play out of, we're fortunate here in with the Junior Sharks. Our facility is nice. I mean, it's where their Sharks practice rink is. So it's a big 4-sheeter, but that also creates some different challenges where there's a big bar and restaurant attached to it that looks into a lot of the rinks. So there's that component. And then there are, figure skating and curling and open skate where it's a lot of people funneling in and out of that facility outside of just youth hockey players. So, a lot to be, chewed on there, but, that's sort of what we're hearing here with hockey. So, I don't know if anybody has any responses to that, but that's kind of the California version of, and newly here from Minnesota, it's a different size scope in California than Minnesota hockey, as I'm sure some on the call can relate to, and East Coast.
Yeah, so Scott, even the conversations we're having with rink operators are that when they do get the okay to open, they expect that it's going to be in some kind of a phased manner. And so the rinks may be able to open at some point, but they still may not be able to be useful to us in the way we need to use the ice. You know, they might be able to run figure skating because you have 5 people on the ice at a time, or they might be able to run some clinics with everybody spaced out. But obviously you can't run a practice or a game in that way, nor can we afford to buy ice to put 10 kids on the ice, you know, when our typical model is to have 2 teams on the ice at a time and split that cost
Correct.
that way. So, and then as far as if there's going to be any kind of requirements, whether everybody's going to have to wear full shields or something like that down the road, we haven't really heard much about that, but I wouldn't be surprised if that comes into play. And we know our club has teams from mites U8 through midget 18U. And those midgets 18U and 16U typically start their season mid-August and finish by end of October, first week in November, so that they can switch over to high school season. So obviously, I would not expect that we're going to have anything going on in August, but it's questionable about whether there'll even be a high school season this year. You know, high school fall sports are pretty much all canceled here. I could certainly see the high school hockey season being put on hold this year as well, which might mean for us that we're actually able to extend our 16U and 18U club seasons to make up for that. But it's all up in the air at this point.
I know last week we had one of our participants from Texas was saying that he's from San Antonio, I believe, that they were not planning a lot of high school sports in the fall in Texas. He was wondering, how that was working elsewhere. The other thing is we're missing our volleyball folks from BC today. But we've talked about in this group before that sports that have indoor venues, volleyball, basketball, hockey, have a little bit different set of issues than outdoor sports like baseball and soccer, where you might be able to space out a little bit more. Did you have some baseball stuff going on in California too, Scott?
I do, yeah. I'll touch one piece on the hockey, and it can be really any sport. Another message that came out, because there were a lot of questions coming in from parents during the town hall, was, should I go and buy my son or daughter a full shield, or should I buy a full, spandex suit? Kind of just getting to that moment. I think the response from us to them was just, again, patience and pause. Like, let's not go spend $300 on all this new equipment we think we might need, or, everybody is stretched to some limitations at the moment. So, and that can be any sport really. Like, I think people just jumping the gun to maybe go and adjust how they would normally suit up for whatever sport it could be. I think until you have further clarification from your cities, your counties, your states, your league, whatever it might be. And I know that's nothing new to people on this call, but I think just the messaging to the families within all of our specific sports, that's a good message that came up. So,
yeah, and with hockey being one of the more expensive sports to participate in, there's a lot of concerns about whether people are going to financially be in a position to fund it this year to play hockey. We fortunately have both a travel club, and we run our own rec league as well, so that we have an alternative for some folks who may not be able to afford travel. But here in the East Coast, you get tier 1 travel, tier 2 travel, multiple layers. It gets more expensive as you go up. Will people have money to do it? And if they do have money, are they going to be willing to actually go into those tier 1 tournaments and travel to other cities and things like that and stay in hotels and those kinds of things that those clubs have to worry about?
Yeah, great points. So yeah, I can quickly just talk off the hockey hat.
Baseball, yeah. You're wearing a baseball hat.
So here in California, which I said, much different than Minnesota, we had tryouts in December. So we started our season in January, and from a batting practice and skills and preseason games or whatever. So we really got into our season at the start of March and made about 3 or 4 games in before everything sort of was put on pause. So I don't sit on the board here for baseball, but I do coach an A team and a AAA team for my 2 boys. So kind of the messaging there is as of June 1 or the first week in June, that's the idea, to begin to sort of see if we can have a simulation of some practices and get together on the field and throw the ball around and do some things. The hope is really taking the spring season and moving it directly into the summer with the idea of finishing by the end of July. So we typically would have some all-stars. So spring season would end and then you'd have all-stars before you get into fall ball. So it's just eliminating the summer season and replacing it with the spring season. So that's the tentative plan. Obviously a lot of different things can force that to be altered. And they have presented some families with options in terms of not full refunds, but just kind of an ABC option where depending on the level of your son or daughter playing, whether it's T-ball, rookie ball, single AAA majors, there's anywhere from like a 60 to 90% refund option based on your age if you do want to go that route. So really they're asking people for is your son or daughter going to continue play? That's what we need to know. B, they're not going to be able to play because of XYZ. We're not comfortable, or we have other summer plans, or we don't, whatever that could be. And then C, you can have the association continue to keep your money and just donate it. We're not going to play, but we'd like to donate it to XYZ cause or whatever it may be. So those are kind of the three options they've given folks. Obviously this could all change and be much different, but in the baseball world, there was some justification where we are, at least, that we did get about 2.5 to almost 3 months of a quote unquote season in before this happened. And obviously we've paid for fields and done some things, but that's going to be the hope as well. And I think also it's going to be a very condensed sort of play and then have some playoffs. There won't be as much playing other little leagues around us and traveling to their fields. It's going to be very in-house and be as competitive as we can with that piece. So that's kind of what we're hearing at the moment here in California for baseball.
I've seen, every day there's someone coming out with their new protocols, their new approach. There was stuff out of this week. I saw stuff out of Sport England, BC Soccer in Canada. Georgia Soccer actually did a video that was showing how you could do training for soccer. And examples of activities and drills on the field and the spacing and where the coach was and how the kids were acting. The other piece of that, which struck me being sort of an operations kind of brain, was one, they were engaging their parents and stationing them around at practice. And as coaches, you all know, we have this incredible debate of, should parents come to practice at all, and do we want them there? But in this case, they wanted the parents there to help enforce the social distancing. So they had a role, and they were all masked up, and they had the parents spaced around the field. And so part of me thought, oh my gosh, now you've got to actually look again at your volunteer program and how you recruit people and how you train them, how you help them understand why you are here, what you need to do, what you need to watch out for, how we want to interact with our players. And then the recovering field scheduler in me kicked in. And I thought, well, if you're in a place where you have a lot of fields or a lot of ice space or a lot of gyms, having fewer kids on the court or on the field might not be tough. But if you're in an urban area like in Seattle, where I've been working, they're already at capacity. And I would schedule, like John said, he'd have more than one team on the ice. There were times when if I could get it down to 4 to 6 teams on a soccer field, I was happy, because it was so hard to get field space. And so the thought of having only 1 or 2 teams on a field so you can have spacing between the kids, I think for clubs who rent space, that could be really tricky in urban areas, trying to actually get that space and get that time.
Can I chime in?
Yes, please do.
Where I'm located in Erie, Pennsylvania, I'm involved in running a soccer club. So obviously in Erie, PA, we have indoor operations and outdoor operations.
Both.
And actually today we're on a call because we're going through the same process like everyone else for the June registration period, club renewal, not having tryouts, that type of thing. And one topic that was addressed, I think, from being on and listening to many webinars and different meetings from across the US with various soccer leaders, I think many of us are getting a good idea of how operationally we're going to handle the actual practices with spacing and the training that will be technical, and it will be stair-stepped with no contact, that type of thing. But the one dilemma that is not discussed enough, it's those kids that are showing up during that transitional time for the next practice. The 10-year-old boys and girls that haven't seen each other in months, and their practice starts, you know, in 5-10 minutes, but you know how it goes when you're running one practice and you're waiting for the next kids to come on to your area, whether it's ice time or anything. It's that transitional period where operationally where we're really going to have to solve the problem of volunteers, or is it parents, or is it an additional line item in the budget to have coaches staying after in between or doing extra work to make sure distances are being respected, you know, in the hallways and all of that matter. I think on the field, I think there's a pretty good idea with all the various protocols out there, but it's all those other variables that will be a little bit more difficult to control, you know?
Yeah, yeah. What are others thinking as you're seeing what the protocols and the suggestions are hitting you? How are you thinking how to react to staffing needs or more budget pressure for cleaning supplies or those sorts of things? What's that look like where you are? Jeff?
Yeah, this is Jeff. I'm with Blaine Youth Hockey, and lucky for us, we are our facilities are taking care of most of that. So they're creating 20-minute between session times to get parents in and out without running into each other. They're bringing kids to the rink dressed, at least the plan is, and the facilities are taking the lead on that. So they're telling us what they're going to do, and they're asking the associations to come up with their own policies that drive our memberships to follow their policies, and even maybe add to it as we see fit. But back to your previous conversation too, what are we doing in the off time? We've seen a lot of pretty cool participation on Facebook and Twitter about coaches and various parents coming up with challenges for kids to do at home. We even have people running around with a couple signs that pass the challenge on to, you know, shoot 100 pucks on and do some certain kind of cool drills on video and post them. And so it's kind of neat to see that participation. And we've had coaches and training programs giving our kids on Twitter and Facebook drills to do. A lot of stuff going on. It's just all about if the kids want to participate in it or not. And my son's a goalie, and we had a summer goalie training sign up, and his coach is actually calling him every week or two, asking him, giving him instructions on what to do, getting feedback, confirmation that he's doing it, holding him accountable, helping me hold him accountable, and me and his mom. So we're seeing some pretty neat participation that way to pass the time in this hold period.
Thank you. So for those, do any of you have kids who play in your program who maybe don't have easy access to computers and the internet, and so you have to reach out to them in a different way? What does that look like for those of you who have a mix of income levels in your sport? Anyone? That question came up last week. What about other sports? Do we have like lacrosse, volleyball, others? Not so much today, not so much. We can share the link. I can share the link for the Georgia soccer video. We'll stick that in with the follow-up email that has the link to this recording. So the other topic that came up, and Catherine isn't with us yet, but there were a lot of questions around waivers and liability and what does the future hold. And I think we have, oh, I see Susan is on. But what, do you have some specific questions around waivers and liability, or is it just sort of a general worry going forward? Help us out with how to help you on those topics. You can type stuff in the chat box, or you can just speak up.
I'd add to the question too, Ruth, for anybody on there is, how do you guys, if you need to report somehow on, what the facilities cleaning is, or, that the kids are staying separated enough, or, this multitude of things that might come up with, reopening as the government's letting people, how do you guys plan on tracking those and recording, some of those items as you reopen and get out in the fields again, or in the facilities again?
It sort of raises the question of who's on the hook to make sure that everybody's doing what we're supposed to do. We'll miss you, Jeff. Come back next week. I know I've been dealing with, not in youth sports, but in UPSL and WPSL, adult soccer. There's been a lot of questions about who's going to, for lack of a better word, who's going to enforce the protocols, and sort of at a big level, and then at a more specific level, if Gabe's team is doing all of the things they're supposed to do and his club is doing all the things that they've been asked to do, and I'm a slacker and I'm doing some of them but not all of them, and I'm not taking it terribly seriously, what happens if we go out on the field or on the ice and Gabe says, well, I don't really want to play Ruth's team because she's not following the protocols and I don't think it's safe. And so you look at the consequences to me for not following the protocols, but are there consequences if Gabe's team says, we're not going to play you, Ruth, because you're slacking off? Are any of your clubs and your leagues dealing with kind of who's on the hook to make sure this all works?
Well, I think if you're working with an indoor facility, pretty much the facility is monitoring that or overall responsible for that. But I think to your point about, who's following the rules and who's not following the rules, I think our bigger concern is not so much that the kids or the other teams, or if we're playing a game or something like that, are following the rules. It's going to be the spectators. It's going to be the parents or the families. If the facility allows spectators in, they're the ones who are going to be disregarding the rules. There's always going to be some guy there who's going to say, I don't want to wear a mask, even if they say I have to wear a mask or whatever. It's not going to be the kids, really. The kids are going to do what they need to do because they want to play. And for the most part, the parents are going to make sure the kids do what they want to do. But there's going to be somebody's grandfather or somebody's uncle or somebody's cousin who comes in and doesn't want to do what he doesn't want to do. And that's going to be a problem. And then people have to deal with that. You then have to put yourself at some risk to deal with this person, who doesn't want to, manage the risks the way they're dictating it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It is true. I mean, we've seen the debates amongst our friends and neighbors and colleagues about balancing public health and public freedom, and they often get a bit testy. But I think the question of who encourages us to follow the rules is going to be actually one of the tougher things to deal with, because people don't like conflict. I'm a professional mediator. I kind of do it for a living, but I'm an oddball. Most people don't want the confrontation. Yeah, Gabe, I can see you're laughing at me again. What other questions do you have about insurance, about waivers, about liability? Are any of you seeing in your rental agreements for facilities, are the terms of those agreements beginning to change? Are they requiring different kinds of insurance now?
I haven't seen anything yet, but
Not
I
yet?
think it may be too soon for them to even know what to require yet at this point, at least in our area.
Okay.
Same here in Minnesota. After the meeting, one of your sessions, the last time I joined, and I went right to our risk manager at the district level for Minnesota hockey, and he sort of just said, well, don't worry about it now. So I just gave him a heads up, like, we're going to expect to hear this. And again, we're at 3 rinks, and they're owned by, 2 are owned by a city. Well, 3 different cities own each rink. So we're kind of at that wait and see too. And we expect protocols will be different for each rink as well. So I'd be interested if anybody can even name this type of insurance policy we might be looking at, because, at Minnesota hockey, at least my contact, I caught him off guard a bit, I think, so.
I know there's a soccer facility here in Washington State that rents. It's a huge facility, and we had someone on 3 weeks ago, who said they'd brought up the issue, but he owns a youth soccer club, and he says he's having a devil of a time finding insurance that is going to meet the new requirements that this facility is trying to put on him. He's like, I don't think that policy exists. And he's a pretty skookum business person, but he's having trouble finding it. So I want to welcome Catherine back. Catherine Knorr was with us last week, and she practices law in the lovely state of Hawaii. And apparently she's a recovering judge as well. But she's been working with a variety of, she does a lot of sports law, and she's been helping some folks with waivers. So she can also help us with this discussion if you have specific concerns about what are even the questions to ask going forward. I did admit to her earlier today that once upon a time I just cut and pasted a waiver that looked good for a club I was working with, which might not have been the brightest thing for me to do. Welcome, Catherine.
Hi, how are you, Ruth?
I'm doing well.
Well, I following up on our conversation today, earlier today, I wanted to answer a question that we were posing, and that is, can you just copy a waiver, a liability waiver that is from a similar sport or club and just use it? Of course you can. You can do anything you want. I came up with kind of an analogy. Okay, you're going to spend money to buy an insurance policy, and you don't have to. Or maybe you do, maybe there's a requirement that you do, but you buy insurance for peace of mind. And when you buy that insurance policy, you may not use it. You may just have it there, and it provides you peace of mind, and you are going to use it if someone files a lawsuit or files a claim. If they file a claim and under the policy, or you need to file a claim under the policy, because there's 2 things. There's first party coverage, where you're going to seek a payment by the insurer, or there's third party coverage, where your policy provides a duty to defend and also indemnity in case there has to be a payout under the policy. Well, you may be paying those premiums for a long time before you make a claim or you utilize the policy. It's kind of the same thing with a liability waiver. You have this thing that you need, but you may not, see the result of it. In fact, you may never see the result of it. However, if for some reason something goes wrong and a lawsuit is filed against your organization, and the insurance company that provides you a duty to defend does that, and they begin litigation, that attorney will look at your liability waiver very carefully, and if it's a liability waiver that will likely be upheld, they'll file a motion for summary judgment and try to dismiss the case. If it's a well-crafted liability waiver, then there may be a dismissal of the case fairly quickly and fairly easily in the litigation. And with a lot less cost, this will impact your bottom line because the insurer will have a less likely chance of raising your rates or dropping you as a covered entity if your liability waiver allowed them to get out of it quickly. However, if your liability waiver is ridiculous and doesn't really do anything to protect you as a defense, then it's just nothing. And then you've kind of opened yourself up. So what I say is that, spend a little money in to protect yourself and make sure the liability waiver fits the law in your state as well as with your activity. And I do liability waivers for people all over the country. And it's interesting because I always ask them a lot of questions about their activities that they're offering. And sometimes there's information that you need in that liability waiver that would only pertain to your activity or your area. Like, let's just say that your event is a soccer, soccer games that are at the base of a volcano. Okay. Well, there's a very good chance that if you're using some liability waiver that was prepared by someone for a soccer game that's done in a state with no mountains and no volcanoes, that's probably not going to work.
It is the 40th anniversary of our volcano going off in Washington State.
Okay.
We actually have one.
I know. I'm from Seattle, so I'm from Bellevue, and I remember it. I was going to college at the time.
Oh my gosh. So, what other questions? At least 3 of you had questions about waivers and liability. Those were things that came in this week. How are you thinking about liability going forward in your sport? What are you worried about?
They're so worried they can't say anything. I mean, sometimes you're so worried about it that you can't even articulate what you're worried about or what the questions are. So, or sometimes we just don't know what the questions to ask are.
Yeah.
One of our concerns is that, we start the season, we purchase ice for the season, we're going for a couple of months, and then there's some kind of another outbreak, because people aren't doing what they need to do or whatever, and everything gets shut down again. Then dealing with the arenas for because a lot of times we have to pay a month in advance or some amount in advance for the ice. How we're going to deal with that around it's not really handled in our existing contracts because it's not something that was really contemplated, I guess. I expect that they're going to be reasonable with us because they want to have our business when everything goes back again afterwards. But it is a concern that, money might be tied up for some period of time that we would typically want to go back and refund to our players maybe because we're not for profit. So there's just some concerns in that area about if, we start, we get going, and then we get shut down again, and then maybe even start up again. Who knows what it'll look like at that point.
John, that's a really good question. Let's talk about contracts. Mm-hmm. Your organization may have existing contracts for events, and you need to read those contracts carefully. You need to find out whether it's called a force majeure clause in the contract. And the force majeure contract allows you where the parties cannot successfully proceed with the contract. They can't fulfill the contract. there's excuses under that. And as you mentioned, you totally hit the nail on the head, John, that it wasn't anticipated. The thing now going forward is to have contracts that do anticipate a virus or a pandemic. And one thing that you can consider doing is talking to those vendors if you can renegotiate your contract and include a force majeure clause that has pandemic or virus in it.
So Catherine, Randy's internet is giving him a little bit of a headache, but he's wondering, can you include an illness component to a liability waiver?
Absolutely. In fact, that's what I've been doing. I've been adding COVID-19 elements to liability waivers. So I take an existing liability waiver and then add all of the elements that need to be added for the pandemic. Or the one I did one that I did recently, I actually added language of COVID-19 or coronavirus to that liability waiver.
So you've also got some insurance experience, and Joe Campos was with us from Eagle Claw a couple of weeks ago. But is it possible to get insurance that, yeah, I'm imagining that trying to get COVID insurance now is a little bit like trying to get volcano insurance when the volcano is erupting. But is it possible in general to get insurance that would cover something like an illness, or is that really rare?
I think what's going to happen is insurers, and actually I'm a former regional vice president of International Association of Insurance Professionals, and I'm a member of that organization, very actively involved since I'm an insurance defense attorney. And I do have a lot of communications with the insurance professionals, and what I understand right now is that they are working to, provide product that addresses these kind of things. Susan Kagan, I don't know if you saw her earlier. She was on
She was with us for a while.
Yeah. I told her that she should do this. She's an insurance broker on Maui, and she provides insurance to sports people all over the country. And she would be able to answer that question better than I in terms of what product might be available. But really, these questions should be posed to your insurance broker and find out if they have any product available to you. And I would keep that communication open and just talk to them about, can you email me? Can you let me know if you have anything that I might be interested that relates to either a pandemic or coronavirus?
Yeah. The couple of folks I've talked to who work in insurance haven't seen a lot of products that seem to match up yet.
Okay.
And I know from soccer standpoint, when we are registering our players, whether it's through the United States Youth Soccer Federation or U.S. Club Soccer, a part of their registration fees for their player passes, a lot of this secondary insurance that from the past it just really covers secondary type issues. Mm-hmm. And I don't even think our governing bodies have any new statement with regards to what else will be covered going forward with them in their registration fees.
Yeah, and that is a really good point, Jamie, because national governing bodies they can only provide the product that they get from the insurers. If the insurers don't have the product, then they can't get it. And what's interesting to me, because my experience with national governing bodies is primarily with USA Triathlon, because I had all these types of, I was regional coordinator of officials before for 8 years and did all the stuff with them. And I remember being very concerned about the risk management piece. And a lot of times, for example, USA Triathlon, the way I look at that national governing body is it's essentially an insurer. You know, I mean, they don't serve as an insurer, but one of their main benefits that they provide to their members is insurance. And if they didn't provide insurance to their members, the benefits would be significantly reduced and not as desirable. And I'm not sure about other NGBs, but I know that one, that's my observation.
That's why I think a lot of us are going to be waiting early on for our leadership from these governing bodies to tell us what's included. But then you run into situations from, you know, in soccer, outdoor soccer is different because things are covered when we're playing in sanctioned type events and leagues versus indoor if things are not sanctioned. So you're looking at a different insurance product and situation during those times of the year. So operationally, there's so many unknowns out there for everyone.
But, you know, the thing is, national governing bodies are working hard to provide some guidelines. But I think it's important to press them in terms of what you need, because think about it, the national governing body, they're a big client to an insurer. So if they're giving a lot of pressure to an insurance company to provide product for them that fits what you're doing, then you know, it might be done faster, or it might actually be done.
It's interesting. I've got some folks I work with in Southern California, and they have a number of leagues in the soccer realm where the players are not affiliated with any national governing body. They just do their own thing, and there is no insurance, and there are no protocols. And in some ways, it's liberating because you're not having to put up with the bureaucracy, but it does have a whole nother sense of liability and risk to it because they're not affiliated with anybody.
But you know, one thing that I think you should consider in terms of risk management when you're looking at how you proceed is that, you know, everyone's in the same boat, okay, with regard to sport. Well, maybe they're in different boats. Some might be smaller, or some might be bigger boats. But I'm just saying that everyone has this challenge, okay? And, you know, there's a certain amount of work that you need to do in order to make your sport as safe as possible in a return to play scenario. However, you can only do what you can do. And I had mentioned last time, and I think this is a really key point that needs to be stressed over and over again, is, well, I'm going to make a couple points. One is that public policy favors activity, like sport activity, okay? And that means that the courts are not likely to want to interfere with it ultimately. And so you end up having good results in lawsuits in relation to sport. And now I can't remember my other point. Of course I would forget it, but okay, I'll think of it in a few minutes.
Oh, right. Oh, so what other issues do you have? We've got about 7 more minutes before we wrap up. We tend not to run long because we know you've got many things to do, and some of you have been on multiple calls today already. Last thoughts on insurance and liability and how to move forward, Bob?
I have a question. If you wear a mask, can you be within the closer distances? And secondly, can you play with masks?
What about masks? If you're wearing a mask, can you be at a closer distance with other people, and can you actually play sports while you're wearing a mask?
Yeah.
Anyone? Help Bob out.
Well, what I understand about masks is that it depends on the quality of the particular mask in terms of what the effectiveness is. If you have a cloth mask, it would be a lower effectiveness than a surgical mask, and a surgical mask would be a lower of effectiveness as an N95. If you're, we had a big discussion about that in Zumba, like whether people would wear masks. If you're within, the reason why in Hawaii we have to wear masks is, and we also keep social distance, is because the mask, it protects people from you. It doesn't protect, because it will contain, I believe, some of the content of your talking or your coughing or your sneezing, but it's not, people could still get infected, I think. The thing that's most important is social distance. However, in sport, obviously that's a problem. I think people are going to assume the risk. Like, everyone who decides to play, whether they play with a mask or whether they play without, is making a specific decision as to whether they want to assume the risk. They're evaluating it themselves, and that's the bottom line. And frankly, we should give people that opportunity. You provide them as much information as they can, and then they make the decision. But if they're a child, that's kind of difficult because it's the parent. They may not want to do it, but the parent may want them to do it, and maybe that's a problem. So it's different with when you're talking about assumption of risk. It's different with children versus adults.
I noticed in a lot of the protocols that we've been seeing this week from different states, from British Columbia, from Canada and the UK, that a number of the protocols have requirements that coaches wear masks, but not necessarily that the players do. And that's an observation I didn't dive into. Was that a convenience thing, or was there something else behind it? But I'm seeing more of coaches wearing masks and it being optional for players.
But those regulations and guidelines are going to be set locally and going to vary from state to state or even county to county, right? I mean,
right.
You have to abide by whatever your local regulations are.
Right. And where I am, which is apparently where the first cases in the US started, literally in my neighborhood, in my county, we're opening up a little bit. We're a little gun shy, but we will probably have mask requirements that happen on top of the opening. That's what it sounds like here in the next few days. So it is something of a moving target, trying to figure out what the rules of the game are, if you will. So one of the things,
it will likely change too. It will likely change, because if you have a soft opening of different things, then they will look 2 weeks later, is there an increase of cases? And if there is not, then they can continue on and maybe add more. But if there is, then whatever you're doing might shut down. So you have to be thinking about that when you're thinking about risk management. Are you going to get shut down? You're going to start, you're going to plan, and then all of a sudden things might shut down, and you have to be ready for it.
Yeah, it is a lot of scenario planning right now in terms of, if this happens, I can proceed this way, and if this happens, I proceed this way. And there are a lot of folks doing a lot of different scenarios, which is taxing the hockey patience that Scott talked about.
I had a conversation with somebody this past week where we were talking about starting to put together teams, or at least planning teams. And they said, well, you should plan for bigger teams, a number of players on a team, than you normally would in case somebody gets sick. And I was like, are you kidding me? If somebody on the team gets sick, the whole team is shut down. You're not going to say, okay, he's got COVID, next guy step in, you know?
Right.
Like, I don't know what these people are thinking sometimes.
Oh my gosh. Oh, so as we wrap this up, we do this at the end of every session and during the week. What are the topics that you want to take on, that you want us to talk about next week? Sometimes if we know folks who are really, really smart, we invite them to help us with conversations when we know the topics. So what's top of mind right now that you want us to talk about next week? Anyone? Okay, next week we're bringing really good coffee.
Mm.
That'll get Gabe's attention.
I got plenty of strong coffee right now, all the time.
All the time. Oh, well, we will send out the recording of this. You can share it with your folks at the club. We will include the link to the Georgia soccer video that had some examples of spacing and parents helping out for those of you who are interested. Feel free to email us, or when you sign up for next week, let us know what questions you have, what topics are on your mind. And we're really glad you spent an hour with us to talk about youth sports and how to keep moving forward in an age of more uncertainty than we're really comfortable with. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks,
Aloha.
everybody.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Bye.